think of it like this. Imagine if you went to the doctor's waiting room and, instead of getting to come in and spend one time with the doctor and tell them what was wrong and what you need and the rest of it, imagine if the doctor came out and said, right, quickly, who's got the most serious problems here? Okay. And you had to sort of say it in front of everyone else. And then you'll go, all right, okay, I'm going to think of something that I can give you all that's not going to harm any of you, but it's probably going to help more of you more than. Can you think of like what the difference in the result is? That's the difference between going to an off-season S&C and working on the things that you need, as opposed to working like often in a team setting.
Today I'm joined by a specialist strength and conditioning coach, Tom Walsh. He's worked with professional teams across the globe in multiple sports, and today we're diving into the starting age for S&C, who actually needs a coach, and how teams can integrate S&C into their programs without wasting time or resources. And stick around because we also explore how gamification can level up your coaching and make training not just more effective, but way more engaging. How you going? Welcome to the show.
Hello, mate. Good to see you again.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about youth development and incorporating S&C into rugby programs. Do you want to kick us off?
Cool. Okay. Two things that sound like fun. Where do you want to start? What do you want to know about? What do you want? Who do you want me to upset first?
I suppose the big thing is, at what age should athletes start with an S&C program?
Okay, that's actually a really good question. So anecdotally, you'll know this from coming from New Zealand, how good farmers' kids are at rugby. So, like anecdotally, we know that puberty is kind of like a game changer. It's it's kind of like steroids, and so like a lot of S&Cs, they'll get kids on a program when they're around somewhere between like 12, 14, and they'll come back absolutely convinced that that program, those exercises were incredible because, within 6 to 12 months, these kids were taller, they were bigger, they needed bigger shirts, and all the rest of it. And it's true that it developed the kids like exponentially, but so would going out into a field and digging with a spade for, a few hours a day. So I think that anything, it's really like load dependent, dosage dependent. So people will talk about weights, like, is it a mistake to get kids on weights early? It's dosage dependent, it's load dependent, it depends where that kid is at, and really like the kind of criticisms of weights being dangerous for kids, all those things that are dangerous for kids are dangerous for adults. So if you like, put a 14-year-old on a weight training program, and you're not policing things like eccentric phases, and you're not policing things like, are they compensating more and more and more to add more and more load, or are they sacrificing more range of movement to add more and more load, and that people are considering that improvement, that will hurt a 14-year-old, that will hurt a 16-year-old, but it will also hurt a 40-year-old investment banker. So the thing is, as long as something's been implemented properly, you can actually start like really young. I would say there is an age where it's not harmful to start with weights, but you're probably better off doing things which you get from team sports. So if you could have like someone who's like under 12, and if you have the option of having them playing like one sport and doing weights, you're probably much better off getting them to play 3 sports and starting weights later. And it's not necessarily the weights is bad. It's the kind of benefits from a motor skill perspective and from like a social perspective, just learning like what's it like being the person who has to take the free throw in basketball, and it's all on me. What's that like compared to playing football, where I'm in a team and I have to communicate with others and we have to lose collectively? Like if you're like not letting a kid have the chance to get at least 3 of those sports in, because you're doing weights, it's probably better to do that later. like, around puberty or, through puberty. But it's not necessarily like bad to get someone doing weights early if you're paying attention to load, if you're paying attention to joint actions, if you're paying attention to compensations, if you're paying attention to speed and stuff like that. It's not bad. I just think it's more productive to start later. Um, the other big thing is the growth plate thing. So people sort of say, like, anecdotally, like, weight stunts growth and all the rest of it. And then there's a big argument about, is there actually any research to back that up? So I think looking at the growth plate thing, that's like an issue in youth. If you look at it, anecdotally, you do see this effect does seem to be the case with swimmers and gymnasts. So I can't remember how to pronounce her name, but Vera, like, Chasklava, or the Czech gymnast. She's like the last woman to, I think, win an Olympic gold in gymnastics, because progressively it's become more and more and more of a children's sport. And anecdotally, I think you see, like, some evidence of stunting in that. And we know from studies on things like cricketers and baseball players that repeat overhead throwing can actually cause the humerus to talk. So if you're actually getting that happening from throwing, I think theoretically you should be able to do some damage with weight, when those growth plates are still forming. But, like, yeah, again, that's a debate. Um, but for me, it's like, if you're under 12, I'd probably just be playing at least three sports, and then trying to vary your motor skills as much as possible. So if you're playing something like football, you're not getting to tussle, you're not getting to throw much. So things like that, you're not getting to catch much. So if you can combine sports to sort of hit as many motor skill variants as possible, that's probably better than weights. But I don't think weights is necessarily bad, you know. Um, and when it is bad, it's bad when you're older. You know what I mean? It's the same things that are going to hurt a kid are going to hurt, like, someone who's older. You know.
So up to say 12, 14, multiple sports. What is the preference like? So they're trying to hit. So you want some sort of martial arts, I guess, some sort of grappling, some sort of contact. What would be some ideal sports for a rugby development?
So I would say 12 to 16. Unless you're working for, like, a professional, like, club, or unless you're working for a national team, you shouldn't be thinking about developing a rugby player. You should be thinking about developing, like, a happy, healthy person. And rather than thinking in terms of talent ID, look at enjoyment ID. So if you've got some kid and he's got, like, long arms, and he could be good at discus, unless he enjoys the discus, forget about it. You know what I mean? So, like, look at, like, how can I get this kid playing varied sports which they enjoy, where they're getting to do as much as possible. So if you've got a kid who, like, loves judo, great, get them to do judo. Yes, that will probably make them better at something like rugby league. It'll probably make them better at something like rugby union. But then think about, what are they missing if they're only doing judo? So it's an individual sport, really. So can you also get them playing a team sport from a psychological perspective? Judo, there's no jumping, there's no catching, there's no striking in a traditional sense, there's no climbing, there's no swimming. You know what I mean? So if you could combine that with something like a GAA sport or a kicking sport, you start to. And the way I do it is writing Venn diagrams. You give coaches, you give parents, like, a Venn diagram type thing, where they get three circles there for three sports, and go, what things are overlapping? I'm getting wrestling, wrestling, wrestling year round with this sport. You know what I mean? And you can start to see, like, how does that build a curriculum for the kid? Um, and just simple motor skills. Um, how are you getting in as much as possible over the course of a season or over the course of a week? And
And so, what would be some indicators, like, for a parent or coach to go, my child needs, from a rugby perspective, more development in a certain area, strength and conditioning wise?
well, I mean, I think if they're a certain age, you probably just want them getting game time and getting exposure to opportunities, because you'll get kids who sort of dominate under 12s because they're stronger than everyone. And then by under 16s, it's not fun for them anymore because they haven't developed a skill set. So I would only start thinking about like filling in those gaps later. So like someone who's like 16 to sort of more under 20, that sort of bracket, you'd start thinking about, mm, could you be a bit more powerful? Could you be a bit stronger? Could you be a bit faster? Would you be better off working on a rest leg? Would you be better off working on speed? Um, I think when you're going from something like under 10, maybe up to under 14, um, you really don't know how useful that strength is going to be. And you can't really go after it, I think, in that period in the same kind of way. So I mean, I think if you're doing strength training with someone who's under 12, you're more really doing like movement competency, and you're more trying to preserve qualities. Like you're trying to preserve their hip flexion, you're trying to preserve their dorsiflexion, you're trying to preserve internal rotation, you're trying to preserve like the ability to sort of chamber, like with the if you think about a rear side mechanic perspective, are they still able to bring their heel up all the way and things like that? And you're trying to like keep those qualities, because otherwise they're going to be sitting down, playing with a switch or something like that, and they'll lose those qualities. So I think that the real benefit from those properties, going after them from like I'm going to build strength, I'm going to build power, and things like that, that comes later on. I think that's more like a high end under 14, more to under 20, um, and then are they lacking in those things? You'll see it in games. And if your training is good and your training reflects what really needs to be done in games, because sometimes the training looks so different to the games. The game is the only viable test. But if your training is built in such a way that it really reflects the demands of the game, you'll be seeing it training 2 times a week, and you'll know this kid can't jump as well as they should be able to, or this kid, is slow, or this kid is, you know what I mean? This kid is getting muscled off. This kid can't get to depth. To get into like this position in a ruck or whatever it is. You'll see that. They'll probably know it too, but they'll see it.
So is that when that's more when we should step in as a coach or parent, is when we're seeing some sort of deficiency with the actual skill wise, and then only focus on that, only focus on S and C really if there's something very specific that they need to work on? Is that more or less what you're saying?
Well, no, I think it depends. I think it's like if you have a program and you're going to put an S&C program like across like a team, you kind of need buy-in from them. So you kind of need to be giving them something that they're interested in having. So like sometimes you might be able to like. I mean, I can think of a team that I worked with. I wanted to do speed work with the backs and wrestling work with the forwards. Um, and that's not really what the kids wanted to do. So I could kind of like, I could try and like flog that horse, or I could just be like, all right, they obviously want to do this. I'm just going to embrace that. I'm going to, get them as good as the thing that they want to get good at. And I'm going to try and squeeze in little things like good behaviors and like, good practices, and like, to try and make it as beneficial as possible. When you're working with an individual, it's kind of the same. Like, I mean, I worked with one kid one on one, would have been a really, really good wrestler. He wanted to get fast. I worked with another kid, again one on one. He wanted to get fast, and for him, the best way of doing that would have been in the weight stream. I think for him, because of his sort of athletic profile, but he wanted to do weights with his football team. So I'm like, okay, so we're going to do this with running activities, with drills, with footwork activities, with one on one, and that we got improvement. We got what would have helped his game. But it's a thing about like letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. If I try and like butt heads with him and say, no, 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 you should be doing weights with me instead, and you should not be focusing on this. Teenage boys just not gonna. They're just not. Do you know what I mean? You're probably not going to get a good result if you're in a performance environment and you can just cut people. Just say we have 60 of you and you're all going to do this, and we're going to cut 32 of you who aren't taking it seriously. Then you can kind of do what you want. Um, but so I think it depends. Like, are you dealing with someone who's working on it themselves, or are you dealing with a squad setting? And I think with a squad setting, you're never going to get as good a result because it's harder to spend as much time with people. It's harder to do something personalized for each person, especially if they're doing like group training. I mean, think of it like this: imagine if you went to the doctor's waiting room and instead of getting to come in and spend one time with the doctor and tell them what was wrong and what you need and the rest of it, imagine if the doctor came out and said, right, quickly, who's got the most serious problems here? Okay, okay, okay. And you had to sort of say it in front of everyone else. And then he'll go, all right, okay, I'm going to think of something that I can give you all that's not going to harm any of you, but it's probably going to help more of you more than. Can you think of like what the difference in the result is? That's the difference between going to an off-season S&C and working on the things that you need, as opposed to working like often in a team setting. Um, at a team setting, you can do both, but usually the S&Cs feel they don't have enough time for it, um, and I think often that's a mistake because I think often they're doing a lot of stuff that's a bit of a waste of time. Um, But I hope that's an answer to your question. But I mean, it depends on the intervention. So I think in an ideal world, you'll get a person who both see this is the one thing that I can work on that's going to make me better rugby player. Um, but I think you're more likely to get that with girls than you are with boys. They're more likely to come to you and say, "What do I need to sort of solve this problem?" They're more likely to put their hand up that they have the problem, and then they're more likely to follow through with that work. Um, Whereas the boys, I think they tend to want to work on the problems that they want to work on, and sometimes work on things that aren't really problems, but they want to sort of, you know, I want to do the things that I'm good at in the gym. And in an ideal world, you wouldn't have to deal with that, but in the real world, you do. Um, so it's like, yeah, how do you come up with those solutions? And that often takes a lot of time. So like you might have to show them a game footage and and instead of like criticizing them, you be like, are you happy with the way this is happening? And you've got to kind of let the problem come from them. Sometimes you've got to like coax it out of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you got any little tricks for coaches to try and, other than showing the videos of one great way, are there any other ways to emphasize and get them to realize what they may need to focus on more?
I found looking at a program can help. So if you've got someone like they send you in the weights program, and you go, well, this is my pre-activation routine, and I can look at that and I can say, I look at that and like my personal opinion is it doesn't work and it's a bit of a waste of time. But they have buy-in with those exercises, or they have tradition with those exercises, or it's been given to them by someone that they look up to. So you can't tell them that. So then, as you look at the program, and you'll go like, okay, so what we're in November now, and you go back to April, and this is the thing that you're doing for your internal hip rotation. And they go, yeah, that's right. And they go, and has your internal hip rotation improved? Do you still have that problem? And like, yes. And I go, so do you think this is working? And so you can look at it, or it'd be like, are you still getting that niggle with your hamstring? And instead of telling them, like, with this program, you're probably going to get a hamstring injury, you don't want to tell them that. But if you see it happening, you get them like their program right in front of them and saying, you've been doing this since March, whatever it is. Has it fixed the problem? and then no, and they go, so is this working? That's something you can do. Whereas I think if you just tell them this doesn't work, this is a waste of time. Um, that's one thing. I mean, I have it doesn't, and it doesn't always work because people like the longer they've been doing something, sometimes it's like a cognitive dissonance thing. If they put their hand up and go, this is a waste of time, and I've been doing it for years, that's really like quite traumatic. And sometimes they just you never really like break that barrier down. But I found like so I get this with coaches who do a lot of running drills that I don't think do anything other than GPP. They're just like quite good if it's very cold, or they're like quite good just to preserve qualities for someone who's very young and doesn't have much training experience. But if I say like that drill's a waste of time, automatically the defenses go up. Whereas if I say how long have you been doing this drill and how much improvement in speed terms can you attribute to that drill, it starts to make them think, and then you can start to have a conversation, you know. Um, so I found that if you look at I had a little bit of an argument with someone about this, about like their sevens program and their 15s program, and they were doing the same running drills with both, but the sevens players were getting faster and the 15s players weren't. And it was just like, okay, so do you think it's just exposure to running? Do you think the sevens players are just doing more running, and that's why they're faster? And it's little things like that, like coaches are just as bad as teenage boys though, because they've done their things. They think it worked for someone, or they know it worked for someone, and then they don't want to change things up. And it's quite painful to sort of go, I've been doing this for a decade, and it doesn't actually work, or it doesn't do what I thought it did. It can actually be quite painful. So you have to, you have to, it has to come from them, I think. You know what I mean? And it's better to do it from as a non-critical point of view as you can.
And so, what are some of the things that you often see that still sort of make you cringe? That go, this they should not be doing this at training.
So like from a cognitive point of view, you'll see like very knowledgeable coaches like talking for minutes, and I'll actually be quite interested. I mean, I like coming to sessions and watching other people's sessions, and I'll be listening. I'll be really interested in what the coach is saying, but I'll also be watching the faces of the players, and like there'll be like two players listening, and the others will be looking all over the place, and so it's just that understanding of like the amount um, is like vastly different to the amount that you can get them to implement. And it's one thing if you're talking to like a thrower and you've got your one-on-one and they have a huge amount of control over the next like run up and the next throw or something. They have a huge amount of control and influence over that. Even then, you probably can't give them more than like two, three pieces of information. But once you have a team sport where you have like multiple people having to work together, and like these two backs have to work together, and it's also dependent on what that defense does, and it's also dependent on the kind of ball they're going to get, and it's also dependent on where and how that ball is won. You start giving like five pieces of information. It's just like no matter how good that information is, it's just not gonna resonate. So then that's a kind of cognitive mistake I see a lot. But then from a conditioning perspective, you don't want these guys to sort of hear these speeches. You want, short, small bits of instruction that are kind of can replicate the kind of instructions that you'll get on the field. Because you really want leaders. One of the big differences between rugby and American football, I think, is that in rugby you need multiple leaders on the field in lots of micro little like challenges and all the rest of it. And so a good coach, I've found, seems to be able to make themselves more and more redundant, so that you'll actually have this is our game, this is our ball in play time. We're going to have a quick game. Don't stop for mistakes, because every time there's a mistake, you're giving someone the ability to see a really relevant picture that they will see in the game and to react to that mistake. You want the mistakes to happen so people can like do the real time reactions. And instead of stopping them, let them experience these mistakes, experience them under fatigue, experience them under pressure, and let them like react accordingly. But then when it's time to stop them, just give them the kind of like question that they'll need to ask themselves on the field. Maybe give them the opportunity to answer it. Don't worry if they can't, and let them go back at it again. So I see that that's a big mistake. It's big pauses, long speeches. It takes away the conditioning, the relevant conditioning of demand. It's cognitive overload, and it doesn't let them see the thing that they need to be able to, the problem they need to solve. I see that. I see warm ups where people are doing like activation stuff, like tons and tons and tons of activation stuff, which again, this will be unpopular with some people, but it has a very limited benefit. And I think if you've got like a genuine anatomic problem that the activation exercise is designed to help, they're not going to help for 80 minutes. Sometimes they actually do harm because people practice the compensation in the warm up to get the task done. If you've got like a fatigued muscle or an overworked muscle or something, sometimes you're actually probably pre-fatiguing it before you go into the game. So that the benefit of these things is that it's like very limited, but it's like even if there is a benefit, it's not going to last for 80 minutes. It's not going to last for a tournament and stuff like that. Whereas if you take that issue, that anatomic issue, and you spend 20 minutes on it over the course of a week, like in two different sessions, it will actually often go away completely. So I'll see people doing like 10 to 15 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes on something uh, every session for a whole season, and they still have the problem at the end of the season. Whereas if you say, instead do this in the gym 2 times a week, it goes away in a month. So that frustrates the hell out of me. Uh,
So, so with those warm ups, what? Because obviously in a team environment, it's quite complicated to do the specifics that each individual needs. What does a good warm up look like for a pre-game rugby?
well, yeah. So I wouldn't do the specific stuff in the warm up. I do it in the gym. So if you've got someone who has like they're like trying to loosen off their hip flexors, yeah, they can do that, and it is going to make them feel a bit better, and it is gonna make them it's probably going to make them feel a bit more comfortable and the rest of it. But it's like managing the problem, not fixing it. Whereas if you go to that person, all right, just do isometrics for your rec fem or whatever it is, in a lengthened position where there's no pain, 2 times a week for the month, and just do some proper glute max strengthening, that problem goes away. If you've got people like rolling out their TFL or their ITB on a foam roller because they get natural lateral knee pain, you get that person strengthening their glute med in their weights program and with a proper glute med exercise, not like an activator, but like it actually you're trying to strengthen that thing at length based on where the joint ends and finishes, based on like what its eccentric capacity, like really strengthen it, not activate it. That problem goes away. So I think the big thing with the warm up would be, I mean, there's a guy who I spoke to Brighton College who talked about a skill up. So they will do, rugby related skills, like go halfway across the field doing scrum half passes back and forth to each other. I love 2-on-1s. 2-on-1s, and you incorporate some sideman movements, some backtracking, and all the rest of it. So you can actually, a warm up could be something like, however long your warm up is, it could be like 10 minutes of skill work. And you're slowly building up the intensity and you're slowly building up the speed and things like that. I found from working in a commercial gym that if you get people coming in and you get them doing warm up, and it's weights, but it's like 40% of what they're going to lift as the warm up. Um, That's fine. That's telling the nervous system this is exactly what I need to do. These are the positions, it's the angles, and it ramps you up to get you ready for increased intensity, and then you can start doing like more advanced sets. But if you can't do like if you can't do like a push or a press in the gym without doing just like 50% set or something like that, you're injured. And you can go and do that exercise, but you're not really going to be able to get the most out of that exercise because you know what I mean. You're slightly aggravated. You're going in with a problem. So it's the same with someone who is coming to rugby. If you've got someone who can't do running, and they can't do wrestling, and they can't jump without just easing into those movements, they're actually injured. And then you're sort of you're you're managing the problem, but you're not fixing the problem. So if someone's not injured, they should be able to turn up knowing that if I have to run 100 meters, I'm not going to tear my hamstring. If they're turning up thinking like I tear my hamstring if I run more than 75 meters, that person is injured. And no amount of warming up is going to make that problem go away if they're going in like tooled up with a problem. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
common one with shoulders as well. Like that person has a bad shoulder. I can make them feel a little bit better with some sort of like pre-activation routine. But if they have to do a lot of tackles, or if they have to hit a lot of rucks, I'm rolling the dice. And the way you fix that is not in a warm up. The way you fix that is like a month in the gym, focusing on the thing 2 times a week. Problem goes away. Maybe next month you don't need to focus on that. If there's some sort of underlying issue, maybe you have to change the focus, but focus on that every month of the season for that person to have the hardware to be able to play the game. But the
So
warm up doesn't make a new athlete. It doesn't give you new tissues. It doesn't give you better structures or anything like that.
when should a club or a team start putting money into getting a specialised S&C coach to help develop or stop injuries or injury prevention or basic fixing problems as well?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on availability. So, if you've got problems, if you're missing players, and if you can't fill a team, then you have a problem. But sometimes the solution isn't really a solution. So, like, I mean, this is again, it's an unpopular opinion, but I noticed this in professional football. I think it's a bit of a problem. It was a problem in AFL. I don't really follow it, but I know it was at one stage. So they'd have epidemics of injuries, and what they're teaching S&Cs largely to do is to get really good at filling out spreadsheets, whether they record all the injuries and then collecting all this data on the injuries and then like measuring injured players on things like Nord boards or force plates and all the rest of it. But there isn't really huge evidence that the injuries are going down. So it kind of depends what you're doing with your money. Like, and you might be able to get like someone who doesn't have a degree. They're not a strength and conditioning coach, but they're quite a good personal trainer, for instance, or like a really good physio, who can just give people the corrective exercises, and the problems go away. There's two types of problems really with these. There's like a mechanism problem and a dosage problem. So if there's something like anatomically about the way the person is moving that's going to lead to a problem, and those mechanisms can be set up anatomically. They might just be the way that we're built. It might be like our anthropometry. They can be environmental. So it's something that this person has to do all day before they get to training, or something they're doing chronically in their life. Or sometimes it's in the gym. So they'll actually have a weight program that actually aggravates them. So yeah, they get stimulation. Yeah, certain muscles are growing, and they feel they're getting stronger in certain exercises. But it's setting them up to be pre-aggravated before they even hit the field. Then the coach can't really do anything about that. And that's when you probably need an S&C to come in and say, like, yeah, change these exercises in your program or start doing these, whatever it is. Um, the other problem, and this is more, I think, more probably a coaching problem at youth level, because they usually wouldn't have S&Cs unless it's sort of like, rep teams and things like that, is dosage, where the coach gives them a dosage that is inappropriate for the game. So um, if your ball in play time is like, like sort of Super Rugby was about 10 years ago, where it's not going to go more than 3 minutes, and you're conditioning your players to try and play for 7 minutes, there's a good chance that you're going to get injuries, because you're overloading them in training for something they don't need to do, and then when they come out on the field, they're conditioned for a 7 minute game, not a 3 minute game. So things don't quite add up. So then you're likely to get injuries. That's a dosage problem. That's not really a mechanical problem. But then it can go the other way, that if your dosage is too small, and they're used to training, maybe they'll make 4 tackles, maybe they'll hit 6 rucks and the rest of it, and then they go to a game where that dosage suddenly goes up, then they're not conditioned. So if you're getting injuries, they're probably dosage related, or they're probably mechanism related. And then mechanism, you need someone who, like, understands a little bit about, like, anatomy and physiology, and then the solutions are in the gym. You know, you have too much going on that side of the joint, not enough going on that side of the joint. I need to give you some exercises for this. Or you're doing exercises which are like, you know, a glute exercise, but you're going to have so much contribution from your rec fem, that the way you're doing it, the way you're built, that you're more likely to get a knee injury, or you're more likely to get a back injury, things like that. And so that's where you need an S&C to look at that. But coaches can easily fix the dosage problem, because the answer is in your own footage. You know, every time the referee blows the whistle, you cut up your game, and you'll see that, like, basically my team is playing, 1 minute 22 games, and so they need to be conditioned to be able to do 1 minute 22 rugby. And small sided games take care of that, and then the dosage problem shouldn't be a problem. I don't. Do you know who Betty Cuthbert is? Have
Nope.
you heard of her? She's an Aussie sprinter, and she won, like, the 100, the 200, and the 400 at the Olympics. Like, maybe one of them was a relay, I think, but she's got gold in all of them. All this, and, like, she's the only person to ever do it. But if you look at, like, the fastest people with 40 times, they often have good 100 times, but they don't have good 200 times. If you look at the fastest people at the 100, sometimes have very good 200 times, but they don't make 400. If you look at, and vice versa. So you can't be a really, really, really good 400 runner and have a really, really good 40 time at elite level, and it kind of, like, filters down. So someone like Betty Cuthbert is the exception. So you've got to think, like, with my athletes and my level, and with, what my referees demand in this comp, like, what is the ball in play time these guys need to be conditioned for? And if sometimes people are conditioning people for the wrong dosage, and it might be too little, it might be too much. um, but you'll have pretty intense small sided games that answer that question, and then that you don't need an S&C for that. Yeah.
And so for just an average coach, for those, what are some of the non-negotiables for those conditioning games? Like, if we're talking about basically mini games and applying the conditioning into those mini games that are sport specific, what are some of the non-negotiables, or some of the things coaches should be focusing on when preparing those training sessions?
So what I found works really well, like, I've done this in a club, and then I was part of a program where we did this, and when you compared it with the program the year before, where they had much better players in terms of, like, talent, this worked so much better with the players who actually weren't as good. So we followed a kind of program of um, small-sided games, where look at ball in play time, and look at something which is like, worst case scenario. So worst case scenario would be, is that famous bit of footage, with I think it's definitely the Highlanders because
Oh,
Ben
the
Smith
four and a
touches the
half minutes.
yeah. I think it's 3.5. You know I mean that clip.
Yeah, the really long
Um,
in game time and ball and play.
so yeah, so those when those happen, they will end with a try being scored often, or like a pretty bad injury because people aren't conditioned it. So you first just prioritize your ball and play time. So just go to one of your games. This would work with any sport. This would work with lacrosse. Film your game, and every time there's a stoppage, stop recording, start again. Every time, start. And what you'll do is when you go to do that, list of videos for your match, you will see like what was the longest, and you'll start to see an average like roughly ball and play time. So the last team I worked with, I made them do 2 minutes more sided games. And I mean, from a conditioning point of view, it worked because they did not get tired a game. At the end of games, they weren't tired, and the opposition was just like completely gassed. Um, so then within that, don't try and teach too many things in the game, and use the game as a test for what can happen in the match. So if you think like a game like that where you control the refereeing, you're controlling the opposition. There's a kind of an artificial pressure because they're in their home environment. If they can't do something in that game, they're probably not going to be able to do it in a match with the referee they don't know against an opposition that is probably being like a little bit more niggly, in an environment where you can't give them as much feedback. That test is really telling you that's what they're capable of, and then from that tells you what you can try and improve, what you can try and work on. So I see people trying to do things in matches, expect players to do things in matches that they wouldn't be able to do in the small-sided game. So to me, that's like use it as an assessment. Um, feedback, base feedback around rest periods. So you can do this kind of like from a like a kind of energy system point of view. But if you're at a like a non-elite level, I wouldn't do it from a energy system point of view. I do it from a point of view of like um, can they get improvement in the next game? Like if you see the intensity dropping off, if the intensity is declining, use that as your guide. But so for instance, if you were doing like a 2 minute game, 1 minute off, and then in that 1 minute, you give the coach something like questions to ask each team. So it could be uh, you know forwards. You know, what are they doing at the breakdown? What is the biggest thing that they're doing? You will see 10 things they're doing wrong, but pick the one thing that you think that they can recognize and fix for the next game. So I did it with backs, and I would give them moves to do. I would say, you guys, I want you to try and do a wrap. You guys, I want you to try and do cuts. And then when it was the rest period, I would say, what move are they trying to do? And they actually wouldn't have an answer first time round. And then I go, and that's fine. Don't worry about it. Go away now, think about it. And we go again. They go again. Next rest break, what move they're trying to do? Oh, they were trying to do cuts and something else. Great. Okay, how do you fix that? How do you stop them? How do you defend that? They don't have an answer. They go away and they try something. And so what you're doing is you're building lead at the same time you're building the conditioning and you're building relevant skills. You're building that leadership on the field. You're building that game sense. That could all happen at the same time. So they start to see like, well, what are they trying to do? Okay, and then how are we going to try and fix that? And you're not really giving them the answers because you probably won't be able to give them the answers on Saturday. If they haven't worked it together as well. And it's great because what it does is it makes the players seem to get like a lot calmer, and the coaches who do this is far less stressful. It's so much less stressful than being on the sideline shouting at them, which some people still do. And I don't know. I feel sorry for everyone when they do that. But the other big pointer with this would be don't embrace mistakes. I like the way it's like Argentina play sometimes. You'll see them like make a mistake in their own 22 and nearly score a try from it. because they don't have the sort of like doom and gloom mentality about the way they play. And I remember like really good example, and I've shown this to a few young players, is like Richie McCaw like knocked on in his very first carry in his very first game. You know, that's very first involvement was a mistake, and I think he was man in the match in that game. You know what I mean? So he's just like and so you can build that culture in these small-sided games of like, don't worry, mistakes happen. Like, how do you react to that mistake? So that there was a 2-on-1 there. How do you react? Um, so yeah, you prioritize teaching points, you prioritize like physiological demand, but then also you can build this sort of psychological robustness where they're experiencing a pressure and a pace and intensity that's actually harder than the game they're going to play on the weekend, and you can condition that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else important.
How would you develop to make it more game realistic? Like, often we can't have full contact sessions. So how do you get that conditioning for that combat, as well as the small-sided games where there's decision making, good questioning, etc.?
I mean, there's no reason why those small-sided games can't be full contact.
It's you might be able to do that for a short period of training sessions, but if you're doing that, sort of 90 minutes.
Yeah, no, but you wouldn't do it 90 minutes because then you got to think this is a dosage thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a dosage thing. So you think like, what are your important skills? What do you need to do? They need to tackle, they need to ruck and things like that, but they need to do it at a relevant dosage. And if you're trying to do 90 minutes of that, you're going to get injuries. And you're going to get mostly injuries, and you're going to get a couple of kids who are just really, really just tough as nails. But then you're not really producing a rugby player; you're producing like French Foreign Legion guys or something. You know what I mean? So like, I mean, for instance, like, you could have your session could be however you do your warm up. And then I like to do backs and forward splits. So someone goes off and does the two big things. If I had like a forwards coach working with me, I'd want them doing like, because I don't do that sort of stuff. I'm just like space mismatches, create space. That's my stuff. But you know, what would be your bread and butter? Like it would be, I guess, like set piece and breakdown. And then the backs I'd be doing stuff like how do you attack space, how do you defend that, which can be done at the same time. Like nothing like drives me madder than people teaching people to do stuff against cones over and over and over and over again, and then they have a team of guys that can't defend, and I'm like, it's not really like you can introduce stuff like that. That's fine. You can introduce ideas of depth and ideas of width and things like that, and where the lines are. But if you want them to understand how to do it, one of the most important things is timing. And unless you have a defense there, you don't really understand like what timing is. Like how much time do you have? How much time do you need? So that can be done like a touch. You can be doing like 20 minutes, half an hour of like, unders lines, overs lines, wraps, cuts, whatever your moves are. And you can be doing that for touch. But unless you're exposing them to tackling, you're not really conditioning them for the demands of the game.
Do you have any ways to do it? Obviously, we might decide to have, 5 2-minute games of contact. Is there any other examples you have that you've used to do that conditioning without the contact that a coach could maybe take away and implement on a Thursday training session?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have contact for conditioning, but you've got to remember that it's like it's a very different kind of conditioning. So like being able to do like repetition 200s or something like that, you go onto a rugby field and you will be conditioned for the running demand. But then when you make your first tackle, you might be completely drained physically in another way. So depending on like how you want to do your conditioning, it's just a case of like where do you have it. So if you're training 2 days a week, Tuesday could be the day where you do tackling. if you don't want to do too much of it. But you've just got to make sure that that Tuesday is like really like, it's really like giving them an exposure that's adequate to prepare the body to adapt to be able to do that in a game. And then if you've got that one kid that like he has a guitar lesson on Tuesday and he can only make Thursday, he always misses that session. So I think it's good to just sort of like try and spread it out. So what I did last time I trained the backline is the moves that they could do well in confidence. We did 3-on-2s, um, but with tackle. So they were confident enough to do this. Um, so we can do it against tackle. The moves that maybe they weren't so great with, or I don't think they were really going to do in a game, but they wanted to do. So I said, yeah, let's do it. That's fine. Then we did with touch. So that's automatically like I'm kind of like matching the cognitive demand or the skill demand with the conditioning. So something that they have mastery of, maybe that's something you could do with the conditioning. Something they don't have mastery of, maybe do that without tackle. So if you've got a game where it's something that they're struggling with, you could go, yeah, okay, well, this game, let's do this touch. Because you're taking out one of those extra demands, but you can't do that, you can't do that for like, the whole week. You've got to have somewhere in that you've got. So think about it from a point of view of like, relevant exposure to the demands that they need to be able to, the questions they need to answer in a game. Somewhere in the week you want contact, and if you're just picking like what is the best thing that they can do against contact, you're naturally giving them a little bit of protection from overload. But this is where it's good to have like a week out. Because sometimes if you put your week out, you'll see what's missing, or you see like where there's too much of this, or there's too much of that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, yeah. And I was I was sort of thinking about how you could apply, say you're doing 2 minute, whatever your time frame is for your work rate. So say 2 minutes. Have you seen or played around with like wrestling drill for 30 seconds, then into like the 3v2s, basically just to take away the hard contact?
Um, so I think the thing with wrestling, so that's a whole other thing, and like so I do a workshop on wrestling. Like I think one of the things about wrestling is that a lot of the stuff that comes from wrestling probably doesn't apply as well as we think it does in rugby. So the thing about like trying to win an underhook and stuff like that, um, it's much more relevant in the sport, I think, than we think it might be in rugby, because in rugby someone has a ball, and once you attack the ball, they're pretty much like they have to prioritize that. It's the same with like um, if you try and take a limb in like a rock, you don't expose yourself to a counterattack in the way you would in wrestling. So I think like some of the things from wrestling, not as useful as we think they are. And then the time frames, like in something like judo or wrestling, you might have to go for minutes with an opponent, whereas in rugby, in less than 10 seconds, someone is going to come in and help you, or the whistle's going to get blown, or you're just going to get knocked over and it didn't work. So with wrestling, if it's skill work, um, where you're just trying to expose them to a skill, I wouldn't use it necessarily as a kind of like break from like a contact game, because I think the cognitive load, like you really want them focusing on like things like momentum, things like feel, things like trying to make shapes, and if you want them to do that well, I'd rather do that in a warm up. So you could do something like, and this is just the skill I'm talking about. So you could do something like, say you have backs and forwards warm up. Backs, you can go away and do your running drills, your footwork drills for 5 minutes. Um, and forwards you can go away and do like your wrestling drills for 5 minutes, and you just say you do that for a month. What you'll start to see is you'll start to see that, and we'll talk about this with the footwork workshop, but you'll see in that warm up over the course of the month who is struggling with those movements. So if you've got a guy who's like swerving and sidestepping, and they look like Benji Marshall or something like that, and they're just a natural with the movements, or you've got like a guy who's like doing the wrestling moves, and he's looks like the Adam Blair amongst your forwards. You know what I mean? Um, that use that warm up for that month as an assessment, and go, these guys could be really good wrestlers. And these guys these guys are really good at footwork. These guys are really fast, and then start to think about how can I incorporate that into context so they understand when to do that technique. When will that work? What do they need to be, what do they need to be seeing in front of them? Where do they need to be on the pitch for that to be a good, viable technique? And then you can include the opportunity to practice it in games. So if you've got a guy who, I mean, I'm really bad at this because I'm across like different sports and different codes now and things like that. But like, is choke tackling still legal?
Where you're both wrapping up the ball to hold them up.
Yeah,
You mean to create them all? Yep.
yeah. So say something like choke
You just have
tackle.
to be careful of the head contact. That's the
Okay. So say you got a guy who you've seen in the warm up over that month. This guy could be good at choke tackling people, creating balls where we want them. So you create your small sided game, and then you get everyone playing, and the focus of the game is whatever whatever it is. It's like maybe it's a defensive focus, maybe it's an attacking focus. You get that one guy over, and you give him a headband, or you give them some wristbands, and you say, I want you to try and choke tackle someone in this game, right? Uh, Provided there's a good opportunity and all the rest of it. And when you get your minute feedback, you'll go like, all right, this team, what did we think of this? What did we think of our shape on this? Get them to go away, think about it. You can call that one guy, so you say, great choke tackle. Can you do it again? Let's say if he didn't do it, do you think you're in the right positions to create that? Who do you think you need to be around to create that? So you can set players secret missions. So I think if you try and teach like everyone in your team wrestling, you're going to get some people who it's not really for them. They're never going to try and do it in a game. You're going to get some people who I think they're likely to get injured. They would always avoid that in a game. They're not built for it. But if you give that a month, whereas to say this is just a movement, we're just doing wrestling movements this month, 5 minutes to warm up, you'll start to pick out the guys who are in the naturals. And whether that's wrestling, whether that's footwork, whatever it is, I mean, you might be able to do like kicking golf for a 5 minute warm up as part of your warm up, and in that you'll start to see the guys who, okay, this guy really needs to work on his catching. That would normally have been me. And then, but it'll be like, this guy's got like, really good kinesthetic awareness. He can put it 30 meters, 40 meters, 50 meters. Can we use that? Can we bring that in next month? And that's not really a challenge for him. That's a challenge for the coach. How can I give this guy the opportunities to do something he's good at and the rest of it? Whereas I think if you just like, shotgun wrestling, you'll get some good results. You'll get some not so good results. Whereas if you do it this way, you can kind of give people the opportunity to do the things that they're good at. And the great thing about secret missions is it's just like it does.
Okay, we've lost Tom. If you are interested, he's got a website, Anatomy Gaps. He does personal training session, he does courses, he does a really cool footwork course around how to step, movements. Check it out. I'll leave a link below, and thanks for watching.